Hi, it's Sue Stockdale, your host for the Sports 2000 podcast. This series takes you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series, which is sometimes called Motorsport's Best Kept Secret. Now, if you were to ask any of the Sports 2000 drivers in the Pinto category who is a driver to watch out for, the name Chris Snowdon would probably come into their mind. Chris has over 30 years' experience of preparing and winning with many types of race cars, and his skills were even utilised in the Sky television series So You Want to Be an F1 Driver. His name also appears several times on the Pinto and Historic Pinto Sports 2000 trophies. And in my conversation with him, Chris will explain why he enjoys preparing as well as racing cars. So welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Morning, Sue. Thank you very much indeed.
I think you're the first championship winner that we've had on the podcast, Chris. And I know you have spent your whole life, really, I think, preparing and racing cars. So I want to take you back to perhaps when you were a young boy and thinking about where did your interest in motorsport come from? What sparked it in the first place?
I'm not really sure in a way because I was in the army and we were based at Canterbury and we went to Liddon Hill Motor Circuit down in Kent, even before it was tarmac. And I suppose that sort of got me a little bit interested. The army guys were during go-kart track, using go-karts on the parade grounds and stuff back in the day when they were allowed to do this sort of thing. And I suppose that sort of really got me a little bit interested. And I followed Jim Clark around. And then obviously when he passed, that had a sort of effect on me. But there's no real definitive answer to what got me started, as it were. I think back in the day before when I started sprinting and hill climb, there was a guy in the village who built himself a Mini. And I suppose that's what really started. I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. But he had a little bit more money than I did at the time. But it was proved a little bit difficult, but we had a lot of fun doing it. Back in 76, I built my first car, which was a Mini Estate, which was something slightly unusual.
And how did you move from having a Mini Estate then and building that into getting to know about Sports 2000?
I did some saloon car racing and then I did some GT racing at Castle Combe in a Davrian. Sort of in 86, I suppose, saw some Sports 2000 racing and I thought that looked quite fun. And I kind of naively thought, back in the day when you were young and whatever, I thought it'd be quite nice to race at Le Mans. And I thought sports cars, I've started too late to do anything really. Sports cars might be a good way to start. So that's kind of really what fired that up.
Did you get to race at Le Mans?
No, never done that. Some other guys have, but not me. When the Sports 2000 Club went over a few years ago, I went and supported, but I didn't actually race.
From seeing that it was perhaps a car that looked interesting to race and then getting behind the wheel, was it as exciting as you imagined it would be?
Yes, it was. And it was a huge, huge learning curve because I'd never had a thoroughbred racing car that I actually hadn't built because everything up until that time, the Minis and the Davrians and all of that sort of stuff, I'd sort of self-built and self-prepared. And then I bought this Sports 2000, which was an 82 Tiger. I bought that and then ended up having to work on a proper racing car. And I always remember going to Castle Combe before I bought the car, watching this bloke change the gearbox ratios and stuff and thinking, I'm never going to be able to do that. That's just beyond me. And then here we go. We can do it in about 15 minutes now. So obviously learned something.
Is it the preparation or the racing? What appeals to you more?
I love the racing, but I also get an awful lot of satisfaction out of looking after someone's car and doing well with it. I do some instructing as well. And we've had a reasonable amount of success, starting with some people that have started at the back of the grid and then won championships. So I enjoy that as well. But I do enjoy competing. You get on the red light on the grid and you do wonder why you're there to start with. And you think, well, is this quite such a good idea? And then when the lights go out, off you go, you forget all about it. And then everything sort of takes over and you have to try and slow things down and you head into gear. And it's just it's an amazing feeling. Winning is fantastic, but also just taking part in a good race is also an amazing feeling.
And I've seen you in some close dices and say, for example, Brands Hatch. I can remember one situation there, Chris. If there's two cars, if you and another car heading into the same space, how do you decide when to keep going or when to lift?
I don't know whether I can say that out loud. Because,
is that competitive advantage?
It's a bit of competitive advantage, yeah. There's an awful lot of things to take into account. I suppose if I'm on the inside of the track, then you're aware that you've probably got the line for the next corner. If you're on the outside of the track, you've just got to be aware that someone might get a little bit wide on the exit. We've had a few of those occasions.
But what I'm hearing you say is about you've got to know the track and you've got to know what's coming up. And then you're making a decision based on what you know could happen in the future.
Yeah, you take some calculated decisions fairly quickly. It's amazing what information is still up in the head all these years. I've done a lot of multi-class racing in the other stuff that I've done with Alfa Romeos and stuff and minis. And it really does teach you awareness of what's going on around you, taking all sorts of stuff in that you kind of filter out the stuff really quickly that you don't need.
You've talked about there for being an instructor, and I'm wondering what's it like when you're sitting in the passenger seat? How do you trust the driver to get you around safely?
Well, I've been doing it quite a number of years now. And when I was doing a lot of corporate stuff, you get a feel pretty quickly after the first couple of corners. And also sometimes as the person leaves the pit lane, there's all sorts of little indications about whether you're going to be all right or not. I had a few occasions sitting in cars with people and they just do not listen. I've only ever had to stop one person, which is, in the length of time I've been doing it, is quite a good record, I suppose. But nowadays we've got video V-Box cameras and stuff where we can see what people are doing without having to be in the car. So there's an awful lot of ups to that where you're not having to sit next to someone that you're not fully trusting. But it is quite concerning when you're going into a corner and you're instructing people and they don't put their foot on the brake when you think they should. Because an awful lot of people who put a crash helmet on think, oh, we're invincible now. We could just plow on and we'll be fine. But it's not necessarily the case.
Hi, it's me again. To let you know that support for this podcast comes from Broadtown Brewery, the microbrewery in Wiltshire with big ambitions. Their diverse assortment of beers range from classic best bitters and hoppy American West Coast IPAs, through to Baltic porters and Belgian triples. Only the best quality ingredients go into their beers, and their close attention to detail ensures that you can drink beers that are full of flavour and true to style. You can have them delivered straight to your doorstep, no matter where you live. So go on over to the website broadtownbrewery.co.uk and make your choice now. And in terms of the Sports 2000 Championship, and I know you've driven in Pinto and Duratec cars, Chris, how do they compare? What are the similarities and what are the differences when you're driving both of those?
There's an awful lot more G-force involved in the Duratec because they've got a bit more aero than a Pinto car. Of course, they're a little bit quicker. Their cornering speeds are a little bit higher. They should be, but they're also quicker down the straight. And I quite like the sequential gearbox. That's quite fun. But they're a little bit, now I'm whatever age I am, old, I kind of feel that they're a little bit too physical to drive. So I enjoy the Pintos and I enjoy the challenge of carrying the speed through the corners, which is key to making these cars go fast because they're not powerful, but they're kind of almost the best kept secret in motor racing for value for money for speed. If you put a pound note against a speed sign, they are very, very good value. But I think I enjoy driving the Pintos. I'm not keen on having to run the Duratec cars with a computer to make sure they're actually running okay and stuff like that. They're a little bit more fickle in that area. I suppose the Pinto cars are a little bit more raw and I just prefer them. Not to say that I wouldn't drive a Duratec car, if the offer came up. If it's a car that's fast, I would enjoy driving most things. But I enjoy the sort of the Pinto side of it.
So you've got that preference, Chris. And I've also seen you at some of the race meetings. There always seems to me to be a great sense of camaraderie and people helping one another out. I've often seen you helping other drivers with their cars and so on at the last minute when something is required. Is that a kind of peculiar facet of the Sports 2000 family that people are really friendly and sociable?
I think the Sports 2000 family is a really good family and it's a friendly crew and most people help most people. I have a lorry that's silver and people seem to call it the magic lorry because there's all sorts of stuff keeps coming out of it. People aren't quite sure whether come and ask Chris and he might have it. There's very few occasions when I'm asked there's something doesn't come out of the lorry, which is quite nice. I suppose the helping thing actually goes back to when I first started. When I started sprinting and hill climbing, it was a close-knit community and very like Sports 2000. We used to see each other a lot. We went to Goodwood a lot. It goes back to when I was competing and I was doing quite well. And I had a small problem with the Mini. It just stopped. And I remember one of the competitors who I was competing against lent me some parts to actually take past in the afternoon. And I think that's what's kind of stuck, really. You're there to go motor racing. And I suppose sometimes I've helped people out to the detriment of myself in a way where you can help people out and then you've got to race the people that you've actually fixed. So I always feel it's better to race the people on the track than it is because they're broken. It kind of sits more comfortably if I can help.
Well, I think there wouldn't be a race if there weren't other competitors. So in a way, helping them to fix their car gives you an opportunity to have a race.
It does. Back in 2007, with the start of the Historic Championship, which turned out to be a really, really competitive historic battle, but particularly with a guy that came over from Sweden. He drove all the way over from Sweden. And I remember being at Cadwell Park and he had been testing and stuff. And I went there for the first time with the Sports 2000 and I thought I knew Cadwell quite well, but I hadn't known her. And his clutch blew up, but he'd come all the way over from Sweden, didn't have a clutch. So I lent him one. So that produced one of the battles of the day and also battles of the season. It was just amazing. But if he hadn't finished that first race, would he have come back again? I don't know. He came over to beat the English. He didn't. So
I'm glad you've had some successes along the way in that regard, Chris. So if people are at a race meeting and they're seeing that magic silver lorry, of which everything comes out to help other people fix their cars, if people were watching on the track, what number is your race car? What should they be looking out for?
Normally I drive a car with a number 32 on it, and that actually stems back from when I was Alfa Romeo racing. Back in the day, I drove a car with 32 on it because it's the car that I bought, and that was raced in the Touring Car Championships as 32. So the coordinator gave me that number, and I've liked it ever since, really. So it's just stuck. 12, 21 or 32.
We can look out for that. And any particular colour? Is it a requirement of sort of racing livery, or do you pick any colour you like?
You can pick any colour you like. Back, I think it was 86, I painted a car black and green. Everybody thought it was a bit strange, but it had to say it did actually look quite good. And I have to say that Kawasaki green and black is where I'm at. So there will be a flavour of that in some way, shape or form. Not everybody's favourite colour, the green, but I like it.
Well, I guess it's distinctive, isn't it?
It's quite distinctive. I think it looks quite well on track. Greys and sort of greens, and I quite like yellow as well. Yellow stands out quite nicely, but green and black is kind of where I am at.
In terms of all of the circuits that you've raced at over the whole of your career, Chris, what's your favourite circuit to race at and what makes it appealing for you?
I like Brands Hatch Indy, and I like Brands Hatch Indy because it really doesn't give you a huge amount of time to think. You're always doing something. Sometimes you end up trying to hold your breath for a whole lap, and you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, Brands Hatch Indy, but also Donington. They've all got different flavours. Castle Combe, back in the day when it was with no chicanes, that's where I started motor racing. That was an amazing place without the chicanes. It's still an amazing place now, but without the chicanes, it was really, really fast. And then you've got Donington that kind of is like one great big corner. From once you turn into Redgate, you're doing something with the steering wheel most of the way round. They've all got their different challenges. Brands Hatch GP, round the back, through what was Dingle is now Sheen Curve. Amazing corners, blind corners and stuff. And Cadwell Park, of course. Again, blind corners, tricky stuff, always turning the wheel. Very narrow, bit too narrow for Sports 2000s, but you can still have a good race there. So, yeah, I haven't got real favourite circuit. I enjoy the challenges of them all, really.
So if you were to give some top tips to a driver starting out in, say, the Sports 2000 category, what would you say to them?
I think once you've got your ARDS course and stuff out of the way now for young drivers, I think stepping up, if you've done go-karting, that's a good stepping stone for anything. But if you're not into the karting scene and you just want to go car racing, there are a number of formulas out there now that you can go and choose. And if you're going to choose a Sports 2000 to start, quite a difficult place to start, but you've got to start somewhere. And a lot of people have just started with Sports 2000s. Talk to people that have been around and just get pointers about what car to buy and where to go for engines and gearboxes and stuff. And probably before you even start going motor racing, spend 2 or 3 days, 4 days or something, going around to different tracks and driving around just to get some experience. Because driving a Sports 2000 for the first time, it's really difficult to think that the speed you have to carry through the corners, and that takes a lot of practice. It's not something you could just do. There are people who've come in and tried it and gone away again. It takes a bit because you haven't got the power to get yourself out of trouble. You've got to carry the speed. I think if you're going to go and buy a Sports 2000 to start motor racing, you need to go, and definitely before you go out on the circuit, you need to spend some time practicing before you go out and mix it, because there's a lot going on. And that's with any formula that you try to go into. Practice before you go out. It's difficult. And people do this sim racing and stuff. All helps, but it's not like sitting in a car for real. It's amazing, just the noise, the wind noise, it takes you back a bit for the first time out. And the vibrations and all that, it's kind of an awful lot of feelings that you're not actually prepared for.
So what you're saying is nothing replaces real life. You have to go out there and experience it. You can't press reset.
You have to experience the whole thing. You can't press reset, no. And if you are thinking of about a Sports 2000 as your first race car, one of the considerations to make is, can you get bits? Because some of the cars are very tricky to get bits for and some aren't. And it's choosing the right car to be able to fix it so that you can go motor racing. And some of them aren't so cheap to fix. So you need to choose the right one so that you can get the bits and also afford to do it, because it's not a cheap thing to do.
Well, I think on that note about getting bits and fixing cars is a lovely note to end on, Chris. I'm sure any listener that's coming along to one of the circuits will look out for that magic silver lorry. And if they're looking for bits, maybe that's where they'll find them.
Maybe they will, yeah.
I've had a great time speaking to you today, Chris, and I wish you well in this year's championship and look forward to seeing you around the circuits.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Chris Snowdon. And if you spectate at any of the Sports 2000 races, be sure to keep your eyes open for the silver truck in the paddock. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word. If you go over to Apple Podcasts, then you can rate the podcast and leave us a review. And we'd really love to tell more people who want to know about Sports 2000. Remember, you can also connect with the Sports 2000 community on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And we'll have links to these in the show notes. Next time, I'll be speaking to some of the drivers that compete in the Duratec Championship. So I do hope you will join me then.